Yo, what's up guys? Shindig here, and 11.2 PTR dropped last Tuesday. Since then, I've been on the PTR playing a lot of keys, messing with all the different rogue specializations, hero talent trees. I think I'm at a point where I feel comfortable talking about sort of my initial thoughts and impressions regarding rogue, and specifically the tier sets that we have access to. Let's start with Deathstalker. Now, Deathstalker for both Assassination and Subtlety is kind of like the biggest nothing burger tier set that we have to work with. For Assassination, the 2 set causes your Shiv to make your Deathstalker damage effects deal 50% more. For the effects that don't do like damage, they'll do 50% more of whatever other benefit they're supposed to provide. This applies to everything except for the energy regain from when you press Darkest Night. Not sure if that's intentional or not. And then the Assassination 4 set, Shiv has a 2-second increased duration and also consumes an application of your Deathstalker's mark when activated. And so this makes Shiv a more rewarding button to press. Now, not gonna lie, the 2-second increased duration is a little weird. It basically makes it so that if you're playing double Shiv, for instance, and you Shiv twice in your death mark, your second Shiv is going to occupy like the last 4 seconds of your Kingsbane and then persist for an additional 6 seconds after that into your Lingering Darkness window, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, it's just a little bit different. Plus, there is the consequence here, and this is in the wording of the tier set, which also applies to your gameplay. If you Shiv during a Darkest Night proc, it will not consume the Darkest Night, so you're effectively losing the consumption that your Shiv would otherwise provide of a Deathstalker's mark. So there is some kind of additional gameplay element there to try to use Shiv outside of your Darkest Night procs. Now, this doesn't mean that we don't, say, like, dry Shiv between our Kingsbanes. You would just want to Shiv at, like, one Deathstalker's mark instead, for instance, so that you then consume the mark and can go straight into your Darkest Night in Venom. Now, for Subtlety, it's very similar. Just swap out Shiv for Symbols of Death. Now, I played this, I did, like, one key as Deathstalker sub, and I mean, it's kind of weird. I don't know, the playstyle of sub with Deathstalker and keys specifically, at least, is a little awkward because when there's enough mobs, you sort of don't really play around your hero talents anymore. In the sense that you no longer want to consume your Darkest Night because doing so would require that you press Eviscerate, and Eviscerate doesn't do any AoE. So I think currently in the game, past like 7 targets or something, you just straight up stop using Eviscerate in Black Powder instead. So it's like you're doing your rotation in spite of your hero talents. They don't really go together. And then this new tier set, adding Symbols of Death, which has an increased duration, but also consumes an application of your Deathstalker's mark. That is another thing that we now are no longer going to interact with in AoE, right? Like in smaller pulls where it's worth pressing Eviscerate to consume your Darkest Night, and in Raid, for instance, if Deathstalker's sub is tuned well, this could definitely be something you play around. But in AoE, it just feels awkward. They don't really go together. So large nothing burger from the Deathstalker talents. For Fatebound, on the other hand, we have some more interesting stuff. So let's start with Assassination. Kingsbane deals 10% increased damage and has 4-second increased duration. There's currently a bug tied to that, which I'll get to in a little bit. And then the 4-piece makes it so that having a lucky Fatebound coin reduces the cooldown of Deathmark by 30 seconds and Kingsbane by 15 seconds. And this is really fucking cool. Being able to swap back and forth between a 2-minute and a 90-second profile is awesome. Now, the 4 set does require you to get a lucky Fatebound coin. If you haven't played Fatebound this tier, what that entails, a lucky coin, is that you flip the same coin 7 times in a row. And then you get a lucky coin, which is just like 7% primary stat. Now that sounds like very unlikely, which, I mean, if you're just trying to flip a coin 7 times, it would be unlikely. But within the hero talent tree, there's a bunch of different effects which guarantee certain coin flips and or make it more likely that you flip the same coin twice. However, up until this point in the game, it's been impossible to guarantee a lucky Fatebound coin in the opener, which has really held Fatebound Assassination back, because if you don't get lucky, then you just lose out on 7% primary stat from the get-go of the fight, which is significant, right? But now, with this tier set, and this is an effect I didn't talk about, Edge Case, which is one of your hero talents, now flips an additional Fatebound coin when you press Kingsbane. This makes it so that you can now guarantee a lucky Fatebound coin in your opener as Assassination. So you get both the 7% primary stat in your opener, and you become a 90-second spec from the get-go. So I think the idea here behind this tier set is really good. However, in practice, it hasn't really worked out that way. For starters, there's a bug with Kingston having a 4-second increased duration. in the game right now, when you press Kingsbane, this debuff gets applied to a mob, and you get an aura buff. The aura buff tells you how much damage your Kingsbane is currently doing. However, wearing this tier set, the debuff you apply to the mob is 18 seconds, but your aura buff is only 14 seconds. So what happens when your aura buff expires is that you lose these stacks of Kingsbane you've ramped, and then it resets. So this is a big deal. Your most damaging ticks of Kingsbane happen towards the end of their duration. Hence, Kingsbane dropping stacks like that is very bad. Don't think this is intended. Hopefully this gets fixed. Second thing, for assassination. Your cooldown timings are very weird. So right now, you have a choice node in your hero talent tree between playing a Cold Blood talent and then something else. I forget what the name is. We need to take the Cold Blood talent because it's required to have the guaranteed lucky coin flip in your opener. So taking this hero talent node means we also take Cold Blood as a talent in our class tree, which has a 45-second cooldown, which matches the now 45-second cooldown that Kingsbane has. Great, except when you press Cold Blood, it doesn't go on cooldown. It only goes on cooldown once you've consumed the effect. And for assassination, that requires using 2 finishers. So you're going to press Cold Blood, and you'll probably consume it like 6 seconds later. But the optimal way to play Assassination Fatebound right now involves macroing Cold Blood to your Kingsbane. So you press Kingsbane, you press Cold Blood, Kingsbane goes on cooldown, Cold Blood doesn't go on cooldown until like 6 seconds later, and now you have your 45-second cooldown, which is offset from Cold Blood by like 5 or 6 seconds. So that 45-second cooldown is more like a 50, 51, 52-second cooldown, because you don't want to use one without the other. Do this 2 times in a row, and now instead of a 1 minute 30 class, you're more like a 145-ish class. Not to mention, if you're playing Master Assassin, you have Vanish, which is a 2-minute cooldown that just misses your 145 Deathmark window. So would it make sense to hold your Deathmark for then 2 minutes so you can line it back up with Vanish? Well, then that defeats the entire purpose of this tier set. Now, in practice, you're probably not going to hold your Deathmark for your Vanish. You'll just have to put it in somewhere else. But the implementation of this tier set has created a whole bunch of really strange timings. Hopefully this gets addressed. I was listening to Whisper talk about this, and he was saying that if they just changed Cold Blood to make it so that when you press it, it immediately went on cooldown, that would immediately address the weird timing issues we're having and make the spec much better. For Raid. Unfortunately, Fatebound still suffers from its hero talent tree in the sense that it just really falls behind in AoE compared to the Deathstalker tree. So at least with the current tree, you're pretty much never going to play it in Mythic Plus, or really any kind of cleave fight in the raid. So the tier set for Fatebound Asa, very cool, but unless some change happens, you're probably never going to play it. All right, Outlaw. Fatebound Outlaw is kind of like what I imagine the old Outlaw used to be. So I learned Outlaw in Dragonflight Season 3, and I play Fatebound exactly like I played Outlaw back then, which is kind of to suggest that I don't even think about my hero talents at all. I just play the spec. Now, I haven't played a whole lot of Fatebound Outlaw. Maybe that's incorrect. But the tier set, I would say, is a net positive. You move some damage back into your Ghostly Strike, get additional coin flips. And then when you get a lucky Fatebound coin, it reduces the cooldown of your Adrenaline Rush and Ghostly Strike by 15 seconds. Ghostly Strike, I mean, this is just additional damage. AR by 30 seconds is quite nice. I find when I played Fatebound, oftentimes if I have bad rolls, I struggle to make it from one AR to the next. So having this CDR will help bridge that gap. And playing this in keys, Fatebound actually felt surprisingly pretty good. Now, I don't think it does quite the same heavy lifting that Trickster Outlaw does, and we'll get to Trickster in a little bit, at least in mass AoE, or, I don't know, 8 or more targets. But in smaller pools, and especially single targets, Fatebound performed better than I had expected. So that said, I wouldn't really take anything away from that. Really, I think the spec's performance just boils down to tuning. That can always change. Have to wait and see. And that brings us to Trickster for both Sub and Outlaw. We actually have the exact same tier set bonuses for both builds. The 2 set, your Unseen Blade deals additional damage and has a additional chance to immediately refresh its cooldown. And your coup de grace may now be activated a second time within 5 seconds, dealing 100% of your normal damage. So this is pretty cool. This is actually a bug that used to be back with Outlaw, which they've now re-implemented as a tier set. But in my opinion, the bug made playing Outlaw a lot better. And actually introducing this as a set bonus, I think, is a great idea. And in practice, this plays pretty fun. Getting a second coup de grace for both Sub and Outlaw is great. It's a big chunk of CDR, which both the specs can realize. Now, for Subtlety specifically, there is sort of this weird interaction where
If you don't have Shadow Technique stacks, so I'm going to assume for the sake of this argument that we're not getting any free finishers from our Shadow Technique stacks. Let's suppose we go into our cooldowns, we press Secret Technique, we use Shadow Strike, which uses Unseen Blade and builds us to 4 stacks of Phased, giving us a Coup de Grace proc. Great, we're going to press Coup de Grace as our next finisher, and then we're going to Shadow Strike and Coup de Grace again. This is great, big CDR on our cooldowns, except the Shadow Strike we had to press meant we lost one of our Unseen Blade procs. Not in the sense that it didn't do damage, but that Unseen Blade didn't help us build to a future Coup de Grace because we still had to get through our second Coup de Grace press before we can then build to our next one. And so to summarize what's going on is that there's this sort of unavoidable munching of our Unseen Blades, in the sense that we're not able to efficiently cycle through these procs and utilize them through skill. There's some element of luck involved where we need to hope that we have Shadow Technique stacks to get us the free finisher after we press our first Coup de Grace, because if we don't get a free finisher after that one, then we're forced to use a builder into our second one, which again loses us Unseen Blade procs. And this gets further exaggerated by our 2-piece, which gives each of our Unseen Blades a 30% chance to use 2 of them. So now there's a 30% chance for us to munch an additional one, right? And so that interaction feels kind of bad. The only way to avoid this as sub right now is through your Shadow Techniques, right? So if you get refunded a free finisher coming out of your Coup de Grace, or you just commit to using a worse builder like Shuriken Storm, which is fine in large pools where Shuriken Storm is a good builder to press, but it feels pretty bad in smaller target count pulls or single target. And I specify subtlety in this case because Outlaw, on the other hand, when they use a max combo point finisher, they have a talent that will make it so that when they press that finisher, they'll have 1 or 2 combo points left over. So as an Outlaw rogue, if you're put in a similar situation, you don't even have to press a builder the second time. You can literally just Coup de Grace 2 times in a row. Now, your second Coup de Grace isn't going to be quite as strong, but because Coup de Grace itself acts as a finisher plus 5 combo points, using it at 1 or 2 combo points is better than munching one of your free Unseen Blade procs. Not to mention, Outlaw also has several other builders they can use, which are good, that won't use their Unseen Blade. So this kind of sucks, and I hope that Blizzard recognizes this and addresses it. I think a good workaround, I was reading this somewhere, this is not my own idea, but they could raise the cap of Escalating Blade from 4 to 8. Kind of like how Shadow Techniques works, in the sense that you can build up to 14 stacks of Shadow Techniques, even though you can only ever use 7 at a time. This way, when you build to 4 stacks of Escalating Blade, and then need to use Coup de Grace, any free Unseen Blade procs you have during that interval aren't wasted, and allow you to build to your next Coup de Grace much more quickly. So we'll see if that ends up being the case, but I think that'd be a good direction to go.
But I think the Trickster tier set, pretty cool. And there's one additional change we need to cover, which isn't included in these tier sets here, and that has to do with Outlaw's new Killing Spree. Currently, in the Undermine, Trickster Outlaw plays Killing Spree, and it's necessary to play it because Killing Spree is the equivalent to Subtlety's Secret Technique, in the sense that when you press that button, it has a bunch of positive interactions with your Trickster hero talent tree. One of those effects, and the one I'm going to talk about, is that it will guarantee your next 2 Sinister Strikes for Outlaw will use Unseen Blade. This makes it so that you're able to more quickly build to a Coup de Grace, which is both big damage and big CDR. So the current sort of gameplay loop is that between every subterfuge window, which you get from pressing Vanish, you're going to Killing Spree, Coup de Grace, Vanish. Killing Spree, Coup de Grace, Vanish. Killing Spree, Coup de Grace, Vanish. Not necessarily in that exact order, but you're kind of rotating through those 3 abilities, and it plays quite well. But Killing Spree itself is a miserable ability to press because it teleports your character around, which can put you in mechanics that would otherwise kill you, and while you're immune during the animation, any damage you take during it gets offset as a dot. And if you stand in a sorely, for instance, chances are that the damage you take from that sorely will kill you after the duration, because your healer is probably not ready for that damage. So they're changing it, and rightfully so. It's been a pain point for a lot of people playing Outlaw, myself included. But the new Killing Spree we got has kind of not it. You don't teleport around, so that's net positive, but it's instead now a channeled ability, which is kind of like Fist of Fury. You do damage in like a frontal cone, hitting random targets every half second, and they've increased the cooldown to 3 minutes. Now, playing with it in the PTR, it's a little weird The channel feels like it's too long. Like I'm kind of just sitting around AFK while the channel finishes. Plus, the fact that it's randomly hitting enemies in front of me means that you kind of you're not really doing meaningful damage when you press it. Let's say you're attacking some boss and you have a bunch of trash or unimportant ads pulled on top of it. When you press Killing Spree, a lot of your Killing Spree hits will get sucked up by the ads it connects with. Unlike with the current Killing Spree where you're doing damage to your main target. And it's now a 3-minute cooldown, which makes it so that we can no longer really play the Killing Spree, coup de grace, vanish loop. The CDR and Killing Spree isn't quite enough. It's put Trickster Outlaw in a bit of a weird spot. Now, maybe it'll end up being okay, but I would say how it feels right now in the PTR compared to what it is on live is that it feels and it plays worse. It's just not as fluid. And again, that's not to imply that the Killing Spree change was bad. I think any abilities that require you to like also pay attention to the mechanics going on in the dungeon so that you don't press them and die are like kind of bad abilities, right? In the sense that while it's optimal for me to press Killing Spree on cooldown, I can't press it right now because there are lines on the ground that I'm not standing in, but pressing Killing Spree might put me in those lines. Like that whole dynamic I think is goofy, so that's good. It just doesn't feel as good. And this kind of brings me to my like ending thoughts, which is that a lot of these tier sets and Rogue on the PTR right now feels pretty mid, which I don't think is a bad place to be, but we don't have any crazy reworks. The one change we did get with Killing Spree, while good, has some downsides that come with it, as I've discussed. So we'll have to see if any of these things get addressed and what that would entail for the upcoming season. Now, as things stand, with the current tier sets and tuning on the PTR, it's way too early to tell, so take all this with a grain of salt. But if Season 3 were to start right now, Rogue's probably not in a great spot, maybe aside from Assassination. Assassination is basically the exact same as it is this tier, kind of the exact same as it was last year. If you're wondering why that is, Assassination's damage profile is just extremely good for Mythic Plus. Any classes which have a profile that does like their single target rotation to a mob, and that damage then splashes to other mobs, and then that same splash damage causes you to do more damage to your prow targets, aka Singular Focus, aka Scent of Blood, typically excel in Mythic Plus because having priority damage is quite valuable. So if you enjoy Assassination, if you enjoy the way it plays right now, probably good news for you. But for the other specs, we're, I think, definitely going to need some more love, which might come with tuning. We'll see. Anyways, that's it. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.